thought we were just moving.
Yeah, you were moving.
What happened is he just took me away from my home and dropped me off at my mother's.
He abandoned you, right?
Now, me and my
You and
child,
your daughter.
My daughter, she was only 3.5 years old, and he just dropped us off like a sack of garbage in front of my mother's. I didn't know that, though. It didn't happen just like that. I lived there, I moved there, and he pretended that we were going to buy a home and start a life there. So I was still under the assumption that we were going to go forward.
Until you got a document, right?
Yeah, until I got a document. And then I realized that we were going bankrupt and foreclosing on the house. And that's kind of...
So that was the end of your house.
So I signed the papers, and that was in April. So we moved there in January, and in April, after 4 months of living with my mom, we got the documents for foreclosure and bankruptcy, and then he left in May, told me he was leaving.
And he left for about 5 years, didn't he?
Left for 5 years. I had no car, I had nothing. I lost my home.
Did you have any money at all?
Nothing. No car. I mean, his parents bought him a car, and so he was able to...
It's amazing how people think they know who they marry until a lot of things happen and they find out, wow, I didn't know him at all, or I didn't know her at all.
No,
when these things happen with parental kidnapping.
I had no idea.
Because this happens to a lot of people. Like wives will take all the money and go to a foreign country and take the child. But the person left behind has no idea of what they're going to do. None. And they end up in complete shock. They're so traumatized by this that they have no... But then you tried to get her back, right?
Well, at that time I was at... he had not taken my child at that time. He just left us.
He just left you.
And I should have just left it at that. He just left and went away, and he was kind of traveling around the United States, living in people's homes, writing, songwriting, still attempting to songwrite. And then in his absence, I got a divorce. He ended up signing the papers, got a divorce, and I paid child support, so I had custody. And the order was done in Hancock County, Mississippi. So that's where the original order still remains.
In Mississippi.
Place.
But you obtained the custody, right?
Yes. Yes. Custody and child support in Mississippi. And so after 5 years...
he came around and said, oh, I have nothing tonight.
I needed a place to stay, so what I do, I took him back. Not with, we didn't reconcile, but I gave him a place to stay.
Yeah.
He came back and he stayed for about a year, and he came back after the hurricane. So I went to
You were in Katrina.
During Katrina, me and my mother and my child, I evacuated with them, and that was all during the time that I was working. I was working at a nursing home in Diamond Head, in that Alzheimer's unit there, and I was also doing here in my home while I was in school. I was in college. I had gone back to school.
You had gone back to school. Yeah.
Yes, trying to rebuild my life.
Right.
So I had gone back to college, and that's a difficult thing in my mid-40s. Try to do that, but I wanted to, I had to make some decisions. So I wanted to rebuild my life. And start over. And so that was what I was doing. Well.
Until he came back into your life.
Yes. And when Katrina happened, it was devastating. It was devastating. Devastating to a lot of my friends, devastating to my mom and my daughter.
Tell us some of the things you saw in Katrina.
During Katrina, well, I had to make a decision to leave. I was working at the nursing home, and as a caregiver, you're not to leave. You're to go in and work. So I had to have permission, and the governor came on and he made it a mandatory evacuation. And since that was a mandatory evacuation, then it kind of relieved us to go. And I took my mother. I had to make that decision. My mother was 81 years old. My daughter was 6 years old. They were my responsibility, my priority. And so I took them and decided to leave. And we evacuated up to Montgomery, Alabama. And we stayed there for 2 days. And then when we found out how bad everything was, we just went ahead to Nashville, where my 2 older children live. And that's where they are now.
But what did you see in the trees?
Oh, goodness. Everything you could possibly imagine. The wind, the storm surge that came in Diamond Head was 38 feet. It was horrific. There were things in the trees that you could never imagine. People's personal belongings, clothing, furniture,
up in the trees.
Side of Diamond Head, boats. There were, and it was full. It was full. The trees were full of people's personal belongings. It was unbelievable.
It's devastating.
When my daughter came down to visit, she just cried the entire time. She just couldn't understand. She couldn't believe how awful it really was.
So what happened after your ex moved into your house?
Well, he moved in after everything was done, after I got the house back together and all was good. And he came back about 3 months after the fact. And there were openings with FEMA. And I got him a job with FEMA. So he got a job there. And he stayed for about a year with us. He slept on the couch there again. And my mom, at that point, my mother got sick. She fell and she broke her hip. And my family wanted to put her in a nursing home. I did not want to do it. I wanted to still care for her myself. I've been caring for her for 5 years. So they decided to move her to Baton Rouge, and they wanted to sell the house in Diamond Head, which meant that I couldn't go to school from there. I would have to move to Mobile, which was the next location for school. And it kind of put me in a difficult position. It was a difficult decision for me at that time. I didn't know what to do. I was in the last leg of my school. I had just a short time left to finish, and I had no place. We're going to sell the house, so I had to make a decision. And at Gordy's suggestion, he suggested
at your ex's suggestion, yes.
That he take care of Michaela while I finished school.
Right.
And there was no place, no home, no place to stay. He would take her to Canada, stay there where he's from. And I didn't like the idea at all. But
you did sign a paper, and what did the paper say?
He paid for it. Since I paid for the divorce, he said, I'll pay for these documents to be written up. I promise you that I will not keep Michaela in Canada. And that's what those were specifically for. And what they said is that these documents hold your original custody order true and fast, and that U.S. law overrides Canadian law.
That U.S. law overrides Canada law. And you thought that to be true?
I thought that to be true. Yes, I did. And